At top of the hour, are you ready to go?
Set.
All right, back.
Simon.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome everyone to today's webinar from the Open Group, which I'm pleased to say today is brought to us by one of our members, Biz Design. Before I hand over to our presenter today, Dr. Bas van Giels, I would like to go over a few of the housekeeping issues just to keep the event moving forward smoothly. We would encourage you all to submit questions during this event. This is one of the major objectives of the Open Group, bringing these events to you. The best way to submit a question is to use the text QA facility in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You can write your question into that text facility, and the best thing to do is if you address it to all, that way everyone gets to see all the questions that are being submitted. You can, of course, use the chat facility, but the QA facility is the best way to do that. This event is being fully recorded, so both audio and visual is being recorded. So if you have to leave the event early, or if you experience any local technical difficulties, then the whole recording will be available from tomorrow, and you will all get an email with the appropriate URL where you can access that recording. Q&As, we will try and handle all of them at the end of the event. So, Baz, if you're ready, can I hand over to you to start the presentation?
Thank you very much, Simon. Welcome everyone on this webinar on reference architectures with ArchiMate. My goal of this webinar is to give you a solid starting point for getting started with reference models using this ArchiMate language. And assuming that you have at least heard from the ArchiMate modeling language, I won't give a full tutorial in this language, but I am going to give a very quick high-level introduction just to show we're all on the same page. Let's look at the agenda for today. Start with some elementary definitions to make sure we're all on the same page. In this part, we'll discuss concepts such as architecture, reference model, and so on. And we'll also say a few words about the necessity of a good framework for architecture visualizations. This framework and these definitions basically provide the groundwork for the rest of the presentation. Next, provide a quick high-level overview of the core concepts of ArchiMate. And though it's not a full-blown tutorial, it's just enough to give you some background to those who haven't been exposed to ArchiMate a lot. And then I dive into the meat of the presentation, which is how to model reference architectures in ArchiMate. I'll give some considerations first and a pure ArchiMate solution, see where there are some issues with the language, and then I'll show how ArchiMate tools, such as Biz Design Architect, can support you in handling these issues in practice. As Simon already explained, session with Q&A. For about 40 to 45 minutes of presentation, depending on how fast I speak, so we should have plenty of time for addressing any questions that you may have. One word of warning, Simon already mentioned that the entire webinar is being recorded, so you can revisit tomorrow. If you'd like to have a copy of the slides, you can contact me at the email address listed here. It is .vangils, G-I-L-S, @bizdesign.com. I'll just read the slides to anyone who sends an email, so feel free to use it in your work. So with those preliminaries out of the way, let's get started. As you know, many definitions of the concept of architecture have been proposed in practice. It seems that no paper or book or webinar can exist without discussing definitions, and this webinar, of course, is no exception. Both TOGAF and the ArchiMate definition of architecture is based on the ISO IEC standard, and it roughly says that the architecture of a system consists of two things. On the one hand, there's the fundamental organization of a system, and on the other, the principle guiding design and evolution. And that translates roughly to the catchphrase, structure with a vision. Now, the city of Toronto, depicted in the background here, provides an interesting example how this definition actually works. From a structure perspective, you can see that the city, like any other North American city that I know of, is organized in a grid. From perspective, it makes sense as it allows you to easily navigate in a grid-like structure. If you ever visit Amsterdam, which is quite close to where I live, Amsterdam is organized in a different structured principle, because we built around a bunch of churches and canals surrounding it, so you can quickly get lost. Now, this kind of reasoning about architectures in terms of structure and principles applies to organizations. And the question for architects then becomes, how do we want to organize ourselves? And that question in itself is tricky enough as it is. So let's look at some quick examples. If you look at an enterprise and ask yourself, what is the architecture of this enterprise? For example, an open group or business or any other organization that you may know of, the architecture perspective leads to the question, what's the fundamental organization of the enterprise? And it can probably be expressed using concepts such as processes, information, applications, and so on. Similarly, if we architecture of an application landscape, then we'll dive into questions such as, what is the fundamental organization of the application landscape? Why did we choose this particular setup? Did it, for example, follow sub-patterns? Or do we use point-to-point connections? Do we perhaps use a big monolithic system? And why did we make these choices? What are the underlying principles? Now, as you see from the discussion here, the choice of proper scope is very important, as it's a lot about the usability of your architecture. Also, setting a proper scope makes it possible to relate elements from one architecture to another, fleshing them out by adding more detail and so on. Elements from the enterprise perspective here can be reused when you discuss the IT landscape. Now, the proper scope for your architecture is a good first step, but by itself, it's not sufficient. To make it useful and practical, choice to be made with respect to the question, how will we communicate the architecture with our key stakeholders? And here in this slide we see three different versions of answering that question. Right, there's a layered, polar-sized picture that gives a clear overview of how things fit together. The formal comic is how one part of the architecture actually functions in practice. And we see a formalized process model that shows all the underlying details. And one can argue that the latter is rather design than architecture. It's a story for another webinar. In my opinion, ArchiMate is the language for doing architecture modeling, be it for enterprise architectures, reference architectures, or any other form of architecture. It's of three layers, similar to doing the TOGAF standard. Furthermore, we distinguish between active structure, think show behavior itself, and passive structure, which is the root of behavior. This works also. In the layer, we see how actors perform roles in processes and functions. These result in all sorts of business services that are offered via business interfaces or channels. The layer follows a similar pattern. Application components are assigned to functions that realize application services. The behavior of applications is made accessible via application interfaces. With a data object, which bridge to disciplines such as data management and data governance. Before, the infrastructure layer follows a similar pattern. The structure concept realizes all sorts of external services such as messaging, storage, and printing. Or, this behavior is made accessible via interfaces. That may seem like a lot, but it's actually only the tip of the iceberg. ArchiMate core is fairly straightforward and can be learned with just a few hours of study because of the symmetry in the model. ArchiMate 2.0, which has been released, also has a motivation extension, as well as implementation and migration extension. And we're attending a few webinars on discussing ArchiMate 2 soon. So, with those preliminaries out of the way, let's dive into the world of reference architectures. Again, many initiatives have been proposed and are used in practice. Start with a Wikipedia definition, which simply states that a reference architecture is a readable solution for a generic problem. In other words, it seems definition is very close to the definition of a pattern as we know it in the field of software engineering. Interesting, the token framework doesn't seem to have a definition of a reference architecture. It does have one for reference model though, and this definition is close enough to the ISO IAC definition of architecture that we discussed previously, as it's something about the fundamental organization expressed in terms of entities, relations between them. So, the definition provides a very good basis for defining your own pragmatic definition of what a reference architecture actually is. This brings me to my working definition. A reference architecture is an architecture that is referenced. It's a stat. This is bold and pragmatic, and I've actually used this in quite a few assignments in practice. The implications for this approach are simple. A reference architecture is an architecture in itself, so regular architecture modeling techniques such as ArchiMate may apply. As such, it consists of a model part, express fundamental organization, and a principal part, that's something about design and evolution. Let's call the model part a reference model to keep things simple. Keeping things simple has advantages as it allows us to tie in with things like TOGAF Enterprise Continue. Let's say we're making a generic architecture description of organization in a certain industry, similar to the TM forum models for the telecom industry. For a job, then this architecture is general enough and covers all facets of organizations in this industry, such as business function, processes, information, data, application components, and so on. Formulates some very general and high-level principles that may be reused through organizations that adopt this model. In the enterprise continuum, this architecture would sit in the industry bucket, top row, second from the right. The organization that reused this architecture by referring to it, it's more to the right, in the origin-specific architecture part of the continuum. So, the key then becomes, if we adopt this approach, how do we model this? How does this fit in with ArchiMate? Or more specifically, how to relate elements from the reference architecture to elements in the organization-specific architecture? This is something that I'm going to try to answer in the next few slides. Now please note that I've deliberately used an abstract and fictitious example in the next few slides. I've done this on purpose as it allows us to focus on the mechanism rather than the actual model. So sit tight, here we go. Let's say I have a reference architecture modeled consisting of business services, 2 functions, and a bit of supporting application stuff. Also, here you see that we've defined 3 generic principles. An organization that reuses this model may indeed implement the 2 services, define process that maybe uses some of the functions, and also do something with the application stuff that we've defined. So far, so good. As I explained, the question that we have to answer is how we connect elements from the reference architecture to elements of the concrete architecture to make sure that we model the fact that one reuses the other. Let's look at it in a little bit more detail. The 2 services that we see here could be identical. So the one we would want to model is the fact that these are equal. Meaning is equal to type relation. In a different solution, we would simply reuse the concept itself. But for now, let's assume that the 2 services are distinct elements in the models, and we relate them. Secondly, the friends to translate to or are instantiated in the process. This thing slightly, as direct reuse is now out of the question. instead want to use a different type of relation that expresses that one is translated into the other. Thirdly, at the application level, we see that one service and the component are reused and that one service is added. In this case, both for the service and the application component, we could use the is equal to type of relation again. With more insight in how the two should be related, let's look at the ArchiMate relations that are existent in the 0.0 standard. Here are all the relations that we have in ArchiMate. On the left, we see the structures. On the right, we see behavior relations and some relations. Relating from reference architectures to concrete architectures seems to be a matter of selecting the right relation from this set. However, life isn't as simple as we see shortly. At first, it may seem the specialization relation is the one to use, as it denotes an is-a type of relation. In the is-a relation, we can model the fact that an application from a concrete architecture is instance of elements from the referenced architecture. So the question seems to be, let's just draw specialization relations and be done with it. Okay, that won't work. These two examples inspire a running example. We try to express the fact that function f1 is an instance of the step 1 process. On the right, we model something similar for the two applications. In the Arch language, though, the former relation is not allowed, and this is because the specialization relation only works on objects of the same type. So we can say one process is an instance of another process, but we cannot say that some function is an instance of a process. It means that we have to find another trick to relate the two models. So about this is to use, for example, an association relation, label the associations accordingly. This becomes quite tedious, however, if you want to do all sorts of large-scale analysis on big models, where you have one reference model and several instances, several architectures, if you will. This is time to look at a more specific version to deal with this issue, and I'm using design architecture here, this design architect here as an example. I'm quite sure that several other tools also allow the same mechanism to be implemented. Now remember what we're trying to achieve here, which is relate elements from one model to elements from another model. To achieve this, we start by putting both models, that is the reference model and the concrete model, in the same model package. You can see that here on the top right part of the screen. Each model is a regular ArchiMate model, in its own views, it has its own scalar layer concepts, its business layer concepts, and so on. Both models in the same package, you're ready for the next step. Now the idea is as follows. You select one object, such as an application concept in the concrete architecture, and you use a dependency relation, such as an is equal to or is requirement of relation, to precisely indicate how the two elements are related. You can see examples of these dependency relations on the bottom right part of your screen. Once the hard work is done, which is actually making the relations between the two models, it is straightforward to make visualizations that show you how the two models relate. On the here, we see the concrete architecture, and the letters indicate which elements from the abstract architecture or the reference architecture are being referred to. Between brackets, I've indicated what type of relation that is being used. So we, for example, that the surface offering 1 is equal to business surface number 1, or BS1, from the rest architecture. Also, we see that step 1 and step 3 in the process are refinements of two functions from the reference architecture. Of course, you can also do an inverse analysis. Here you can see the reference architecture, and this time the labels indicate differentiations or implementations, if you will, in a more concrete architecture. Again, in brackets, I've indicated the type of dependency that I used. Now, the mechanism can be quite interesting to use, for example, when you do large merger and acquisition analysis, and you want to figure out how two organizations from the same branch should be integrated. Actually, one of my clients is actually in that process right now. So we have two concrete architectures. We have one reference architecture at the industry level, and we're in both on the industry architecture to figure out what the best strategy is for integration. Okay, let's move on. I'm going to finish a little earlier than I anticipated with some considerations. First of all, we focus mostly on ArchiMate modeling part of architecture work. It shows that some architectures consist mostly of principles. This is true. One is that there is a set of architectures for the Dutch government sector that are principle-based. These architects go by the name of Nora, Petra, Gemma, etc. For some reason, we always choose names of women over there. And it's like with models, these generic principles can still be put in a separate model action and then used in concrete architectures. An interesting point here is the situation where an architecture that we want to refer to is in the ArchiMate language just yet. I'm convinced that enterprise-focused architectures can be translated to ArchiMate. And doing a good starting point to improve communication about these reference architectures within an organization, as well as to improve the communication within the professional community in that specific branch or industry. Finally, some conclusions. This should get started in practice. In my mind, reference architecture should be approached just like regular architectures. Modeled and made, and made universally accessible, at least within your own organization, but preferably in your branch or even wider. It makes life a lot easier. I am convinced life for architects will greatly improve by making use of the fact that a model package can consist of more than one model, and by relaying elements from different models using dependent relations. Such, we're becoming more effective as architects, will also help organizations to become more effective. Last but not least, some more information. We have republished a Quick Start program, which you can find at bizdesign.nl/quickstart1. If you have more concrete examples of using ArchiMate in practice, please have a look at our blog and further find our training offering and more information about BizDesign Architect on our website. Last, ArchiMate 2.0 specification can be found at the website of the Open Group. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me directly via email or just ring me up on the phone. Thank you. Simon, back over.
That's great. Many, many thanks. That's a swift and to the point presentation. Thank you very, very much. I do have a few questions on the queue already, Baz, but I'll just point out we've got a couple of questions about getting hold of a slide deck. I don't think you noticed that in chat there's a message there about if you want to get hold of the slide deck, you can email Brenda, and email address is b.cowie, that's COWIE, @bizdesign.com. If you have problems in that direction, don't hesitate to send me an email. Sign Lofthouse, you'll get my email address when you receive the follow-up emails via WebEx, and I'll more than happily help and point you in the right direction. Baz, the first question we have on Q&A, and this is with refer to a specific term used on one slide. It's from Alexander. He asked in one of the previous slides, he's asking, what is realization addressing?
Simon, by any chance capture the slide number? Where,
it's a good. I didn't, unfortunately, Baz. No.
Okay, let's have a look. Let's move on. So we see the ArchiMate meta model. I'll just explain the realization relation. I hope that addresses the question sufficiently. So if you, for example, at the layer, on the top you see a business service. Now the business service models the services that we offer to our environment. So for example, a bike shop, the fact that you can buy a bike or that you buy insurance on the bike shop, on the bike, are business services. And there's actual work that we have to do to make sure that these services are being realized. So the relation you see drawn here, which is a dot with an open triangle, is the relation. This is that some service is realized by a business function. Basically, this is one way of expressing that something abstract is being realized by something more concrete. That answers Alexander's question.
Baz, the question is from Luis Sequeira, asking, in your opinion, Baz, ArchiMate, and he's saying ArchiMate modeling language, can it be used with Praxema? That's Praxeme. And he's asked, representing enterprise systems.
I'm afraid that I'm not familiar with Praxeme, so I'm going to write this down. Actually, I'm going to ask Luis Sequeira, I hope I pronounced that correctly, to please send me an email so I can look into it and answer your question via email. As I said, I'm not familiar with Praxeme, but I'm sure I can quickly find out.
Once again, Luis, if you need any help in getting in touch, please feel free to contact me as well. This question is from Mike Matrayan. Was it stated that a business function is not under explicit control of an organisation stroke enterprise, while a business service is?
I would say that a business function is still under the control of an enterprise. So is a business service. So the business concept I've just explained, right? It is the behavior that we show to our environment, whereas the business function models the business capabilities that we have in our organization. Or if you were a fan of using rather big functions, they rather map to the activities in the value chain approach of Michael Porter. So actually very much under the influence of an organization. And actually we see in, if you make branch-specific architecture models, one of the things that you can frequently use is the business functions or the capability models, as organizations in that branch tend to have very similar functions and capabilities. I hope that answers, I think it's Mike's question.
Thanks, Baz. We've got a question here from Geert Harrens, and once again I apologize if I'm not pronouncing everyone's names correctly. What's your opinion on using naming conventions to make the link between the conceptual architectures and instantiated architecture?
Very interesting question, because the trick of conceptual architectures and logical architectures, or even physical architectures, is the same trick that I propose for reference architecture and concrete architectures. So my preference would be to use the dependency relations. Now I can see here this is coming from. If you use naming conventions to indicate, in our example, that one business service is a conceptual business service and the other one that instantly fits a physical one or even a physical one, then sure, in your modeling you can keep track of what is what. But still, I think you would clutter up your model repository quite a bit if the number of concepts grows large. And I've seen organizations with literally thousands of objects in their model repository. So if you reach a point where it just becomes impractical to have them all in one model, then I would advise to start moving to different packages within different models within a single package and use dependency relations. It's a short gift. I think naming conventions is a good way to get started, but it does have some limitations, which mostly have to do with organizing of your model repository. Simon? Or if Simon is still around.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh,
it looks like we're at the end of the questions on the text, so Baz, have you got anything final to add?
Well, I spotted a question from Duncan still to find reference architectures for the retail industry.
Yes, it's a good, well spotted. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think IBM has several reference architectures on their website. I saw one on but I'm not 100% sure. But that would be my first suggestion for investigation.
That's it. Well, thank you very much. I think this will be a good moment to end the presentation. So, Baz, once again, I'd love to thank you, Simon, for your great presentation into this subject. I'd like to thank everyone for participating and encourage you all to keep an eye on the group website and the webinar schedule page, because we do have a number of webinars coming up, and we are trying to deliver an ongoing schedule of these events. So please keep an eye on that web page, and I'd like to thank you all. And on this point, I'll end the presentation. Thank you, Baz.
Thank you.